Hi everybody, it's Arden XIII. Where I'm at, it's 4 a.m., so that means that I have to say some things, and people aren't going to like it. Now, I love D&D, tabletop role-playing games in general, and I've been playing it for a very long time. But recently, I've run into an issue where I've been trying to get my fix of playing the world's greatest role-playing game, or watching videos on YouTube of the world's greatest role-playing game. Because some people have gotten into their heads that the world's greatest role-playing game needs to be played in a very certain specific way. And if you don't play the world's greatest role-playing game in this certain specific way, then you don't know how to play the world's greatest role-playing game. To be frankly honest, I'm sick of people saying that the world's greatest role-playing game needs to be played by a specific set of rules and algorithms like it's fucking Skyrim. People say the game is boring, that there isn't enough variety, that everything is kind of just the same and nobody really does anything, the characters all seem to blend together, you got the illusion of choice or whatever. All this ridiculous verbiage that people are throwing around, and the simple truth of it is that you don't know how to play a fucking role-playing game. You're stereotyping your characters, you're not thinking outside of the box, and you think that everything that is printed in black and white is gospel, and that is how the game is meant to be played. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fucking lunch table. I'm Arden XIII, and today we're talking about why you should stop stereotyping your characters because it's ruining D&D, and tabletop gaming in general. Now, you'll always hear stories about the dumb barbarian, the edgy rogue, or the plain as toast fighter. These are standard images that come to mind when somebody utters the word D&D. The problem is that these standard images are actually stereotypes. A stereotype is defined as a widely held, fixed but oversimplified image or idea of a particular person or thing. Herein lies the social faux pas that has plagued D&D in recent years. People will rarely take the initiative to break away from these stereotypes when creating their characters or NPCs for playing D&D. If the barbarian is expected to be unintelligent, then I guess I'm just gonna play a sub-brick intelligence barbarian. Now, D&D may have abided by these stereotypes for much of its life, but that does not solely fall on the shoulders of TRS and Wizards of the Coast. That is also the fault of us as the community for propagating this nonsense. Now, playing a character that fits a stereotype can be a good and fun character to play, but you as a player are not beholden to the stereotypical expectation of who and what that character is supposed to be. And I believe that D&D 5e has made it abundantly simple and easy to break out of this mold prior to Tasha's being released. The problem with creating a character that is stereotypical means that you are inadvertently fueling the machine that says that D&D is full of prejudices that must be squashed by the ever-fucking powerful institution that is political correctness. What D is intended to do as a storytelling cooperative game, a role-playing game, is that you are not playing a stereotype, you are playing an archetype. An archetype is most commonly defined as a very typical representation of a certain person or thing, or as a reoccurrent symbol imitated from an original source. Now, I understand that that sounds very similar to stereotype. Bear with me, there is a very clear difference. Archetypes have been most commonly used in entertainment media and literature to assist us as the audience in understanding what is happening in the events and the characters' stories. Archetypes are where we get the concept of the hero, the villain, the magic weapon, the hero's journey, and so many thousands of others. Some might even refer to them as tropes. Stereotypes create literal and oftentimes inaccurate perceptions of a concept, where archetypes create symbolic representations of literal perceptions. They're the exact inverse of each other. The major difference between stereotypes and archetypes is that archetypes are meant to be symbolic, not literal. Now, this is the part of the video where I might get rambling. I'm going to point out some of the things in D&D 5e that already exist that create this sense of diversity in your characters and allows you to break out of the idea of stereotyping, because that is the core issue when it comes to D&D and all of the controversy I feel surrounding the game itself. Not the company, the game. In D&D 5e, you pick a class. Eventually, you pick a subclass, literally the class archetype. It is the idea of who your character is meant to be in terms of the class of what they can do. However, your character is not solely defined by your class. In this way, your class now is this pseudo-multi-classing, where you have two sides of the same coin. Sure, you're a fighter, but now you're also a battle master. There is a clear difference between a fighter battle master and a fighter psionic knight. Very clear differences. But in that, you now get to create more of a dynamic character, because not only are they good at fighting just simply outright, but now they have a few niches that they're really, really good at. However, again, I will reiterate, your class does not define your character. One of the most slept on systems in D&D 5e is the backgrounds. It's just kind of that thing at character creation that people decide because it gives you a few extra bonuses and it gives you literally nothing else, and then you just get to move on with the character. The background helps flesh out this dynamic character so much. I need people to actually care about the background system. Backgrounds are not super game-breaking, super dynamic, and game-changing. However, they create a specific tone for your character. What did they do prior to becoming an adventurer? That is the whole concept and idea of the background. And of course, these are all archetypes. The entertainer, the scholar, the hermit, the soldier, the charlatan, the criminal, the urchin. All of these things are archetypical. You didn't have to do any of the work to try to figure out a backstory. They literally had archetypes for you, and you just had to pick one of them and go with it. Now you're a paladin who is also a criminal. So what does that mean? You now get to consider what that means, because generally paladins have been the I will vanquish all evil, and anyone who gets in my way is evil, and I am the lawful wet blanket of the group, and I must do everything for justice. Rah rah, justice. But now, let's say you have a criminal background. That's interesting. What does that mean? Oh, well, maybe you were a criminal, but you found faith, and now you're trying to turn over a new leaf, but you still have all of those skills that you had during your time as a criminal. Sounds like an interesting character to me, and I didn't have to do anything more than follow the system that exists. I want to talk about what was brought up in Tasha's, the idea of Ancestry and the breaking of stereotyping that they articulated in that book. When Tasha's was announced, I was excited about the concept of Ancestry. What that read to me was something circa Pathfinder 2e, where you basically created a family tree to essentially dictate how your character came to be, what bloodlines you had, and so what abilities you could pull from and rely on to create your character. Maybe your great-grandfather was a dwarf. Maybe your great-grandmother was an orc. How does that affect your character now after basically being diluted through a couple generations of dwarven bloodlines? How does that look? That's what I thought was going to happen, but obviously that is not what happened. What Tasha's allowed you to do was take your ability score improvement out of wherever it was specifically supposed to go and put it anywhere else on your character to fit the perfect character that you wish to create. Now here is the main issue with that. You are destroying the idea of the archetype of the people. I'm not going to get into the concept and the issue of the fact that you're not dealing with races in D&D, you're dealing with species, and that is a very different conversation. I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to let Mal get into it. You're playing an archetype. You're a character in a story. You want to be the hero. You want to be the villain. You want to be the sullen, brooding badass who leans in corners and shadows. That's who you are. That's not a stereotype. That is an archetype. And that is what people should be playing into. You need to break the mold of stereotypes, because that is what is ruining D&D in the greater scheme of things, because people are drawing in all of this controversy and pulling on strings for prejudices that should not exist in this escapist fantasy space. And this goes for every tabletop RPG out there. This goes for Starfinder. This goes for Pathfinder. This goes for the World of Darkness. This goes for the Fate system. This goes for GURPS. This goes for the Genesis system. Everything. People need to stop leaning into the idea of stereotypes if they intend to preach about prejudices and breaking away from prejudices. Because if you play the stereotype, if you create the stereotype, unironically, you're fueling that machine. I'm going to wrap up, but I want to leave you with a couple ideas and a couple concepts that I have experienced in my own home games. Specifically with a couple characters and players who created them and how they worked outside of the box to make sense for their character the framework that D&D 5e has provided for them. Firstly, I want to talk about Ezra Drake, Mal's character in our home game that has been running for the better part of a decade. Ezra Drake is a half-dragon, half-blue dragon. This game started in 3.5, there were a few different rules. Now, the cool thing about Ezra is that he is a rogue. So everyone, normally, when they're thinking of a rogue, they're thinking sneaky, they're thinking backstabs, hiding in the shadows, being shifty. That's not who Ezra is. Ezra as a character is a very pious individual. So a lot of times, I've had a lot of people who have talked to me about Ezra, or have seen Mal play Ezra, and asked him, why don't you just play a paladin? You aren't sneaky, you rarely use stealth, you're always on the front lines, you're effectively a glass cannon, why not just supplement yourself with some paladin smites? And that doesn't fit Ezra, because the piety, his faith, does not define strictly what he is. He has never devoted himself to, like, I am going to be the sword of my god, so there's no reason for him to be a paladin. He grew up on the streets, so he has the urchin background, but he was never, like, expertly or professionally trained on how to fight. Therefore, he was a rogue. He had to figure out how to maneuver the society and the hard life that he necessarily had when he was younger through some roguish, scandalous means. And that's why he's playing a rogue. Next, I want to talk about Tekandra, who is one of Kat's characters in a home game that we play that is just off-the-walls bonkers. Tekandra is a half-orc wizard barbarian multiclass. Now, when you first hear that, that sounds like that shouldn't make sense. That shouldn't work. How that works is because Tekandra has two forms. By day, she is this cute, conservative, kind of shy, kind of meek wizard who has her nose in a book all the times and is studying all the times and doesn't really want to get into fighting with people. However, she has a darker side. When she gets angry, when she's harmed, when her friends are harmed, she kind of hulks out, leading her to rage and enter a barbarian rage where she gets big, and rather than, you know, strategically throwing lightning bolts and fire bolts and minor illusions, she's in people's faces with a battle axe. That's a really cool concept for a character that works mechanically. The only mechanic that doesn't make sense is why the barbarian and wizard mesh when effectively barbarians shouldn't have intelligence, but wizards do. Now, I would like to sit here in my wrap-up and apologize for coming at you sideways and reckless about not knowing how to play D&D because you were stereotyping and fueling the idea of prejudices and so on and so forth. I'm not going to apologize. People need to understand that this is not a game of stereotypes. Tabletop role-playing games are a game of archetypes. You are creating archetypes because you are creating a story along with all the people that are sitting at your table and the person sitting behind the screen. That is the dichotomy that you have to understand when playing not just the world's greatest role-playing game, but all of the world's greatest role-playing games. I need to go to sleep. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm Arden XIII. I am still waiting on that ramen. If I can bother you one more last time to hit the bell, ring the button, join the lunch table, that'd be great. That'd be swell. Would love for you to hang out with us again. Maybe get another late night conversation from me. Who knows? But in the meantime, I'm going to sleep. You go play D&D. And try to figure out how to break the mold of stereotyping. Appreciate you being here. I'll see you in the next one.